Sanje Chetan Soje Chana La Chanju Bado Danye Dagui Chijin Jewe Sonanje Androla Benje Sanje Druvo Sanje Chetan Soje Chana La Chanju Bado Danye Jesu Dagui Chijin Jewe Sonanje Androla Benje Sanje Druvo Sanje Chetan Soje Chana La Chanju Danye Jesu Dagui Chijin Jewe Sonanje Sanje Truva Sho La Dang La Mi Dam Hong Ji Ong Ba Da Jia Jian La Su Che Che La Cha Wa Che Ba Na Sanje Sung Ba Ra Di Shi De We Ji Ru De Da Che Che De Me Chen Ji Din De She Che De We Jia Jian De Ri Ji Sa Yue De Ji Ba Chen Che Che Ba De La Cho De Te Jian Ku Wa De La Bian Yan Jia San Jia Su Se Yin Me De Ong Be Da Len Lu Wa De Ne Tu Me Sun Ye Jian Na Ma La Ye Ge Da Lu Da Ji Jian Chu Da Da Me Ye Gan Na Da Zhuo Gun Ji Zhan Na Ma Ji Sa Ba Tam Jie Ga Du Da Gui Che De Do Kange Dona De Jian Wo Me Ba Ni De Su Yi Xi Yin Me San Me Jia Be Me De La Cha Cha Lo O Ya Da Ani Da Ka Su Re Bang Gun Pa Ba Lu Zhu Ji Ani O Ren Ji Chen Yue Gao Su Dan Ni Ta Ni Ji Dian Di La Me Cha Ji Top De Na Te Yi Za Wa Cha Ju Se Ri Wang Jia Bo Da De Da Chuo De Du Bin Yin Ji Dang Ni La Ma Dian Yi Xie La Chen Ni我今天送完那些钱，大几个开始送过来，是呢，当你他呢几点去是让当，俺们几点的，俺们那没把养大不作为三月就狂放拖把点个钱那些的，当你几点，当你他呢几点的，那没在抢救拖单那是，我这。他抢救那把养大不作为抢，三月就狂放拖把切把啦，俺们在提把钱别那么来就过来。아니 대바 집에 남진 주고 되라 아니 다 체도 잡아 섬제 탐지가 토자라는 뭐 양다 봐 저에 산제 공반 탐되지 군저 장주지 셈제고 와 연장 어제 대자와 장주 셈 장주지 대자와 장주 셈 태양 아니 장주 그셈 태양 아니 과소래 소재 그 영화 탐바했다마 된제 많이 봐 아니 소매지 영화 탐바 아니 장주지 셈 땜보 리완 잡고 다대당 스체 땜보 아니 장주고 스베리 양보 잡고 나 땜바게 장주기 셈 띄고 그래 장주지 셈데 제와 제발라 가르고 그래 세나 아니 대자와 인제데 전에 저기 그 소나시 장주기 셈제 자와데 아니 자와 인제 전부 인장 저완이지 전부 태양 안에 간데래서나 가소래 심지어 초려와라 미바 마인바 가자 초대 뒤변이지 당시오 초 두번 매바감 나가다니 심지어 탐제기 아니 동아다 찬주지 인고 니지 제고 그래 대자와 찬주대 레완자보 다대다 초대 뒤변이지 당是吧？초타 우바 사바메바是吧？我听到了，俺那东的传统音乐这块教的是，音乐的节目切巴拉，俺那他强是俺不弄不都给人别忘记，俺不弄不着急演上啦，俺那听了看的结果的是啦，你那么点一些啦，真的。
So the master, the protector of all beings, Nagarjuna said in the precious garland, that if one wants to achieve the awakening, which is for the benefit of oneself and the entire world, then one must develop the bodhicitta, the desire to achieve Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings, which is as stable as the world mountain, Mount Meru. And what this involves, and then also in addition to that, one has to achieve the gnosis, or special wisdom, which understands the nature of reality. So what this verse is explaining is that if we think about the entire world, ourselves and the rest of the world, and all of the sufferings that the world experiences, all the problems that all ourselves and others undergo, all of the difficulties and hardships, then and then if based on seeing that one wishes to free both ourselves and others from all of these kinds of hardships, then it's necessary initially to develop bodhicitta, the aspiration to achieve Buddhahood, perfect, complete awakening, not some partial awakening, but the complete awakening of Buddhahood. And in order to do that, developing that bodhicitta, that aspiration to achieve Buddhahood, itself is dependent upon having great compassion. And great compassion here refers to the seeing the suffering of oneself and all other sentient beings. It's not just in some limited way, looking at a few sentient beings, a few people, or a handful of sentient beings, but rather seeing how the sentient beings that pervade the entirety of space are undergoing all sorts of different sufferings and the various types of sufferings that they undergo, recognizing that situation, and then based upon that, developing great compassion for those sentient beings, the desire to free them from all of that suffering. And in addition to that, having the special love, which is the wish to establish all beings, oneself and all other beings, in a state of perfection, perfect happiness, such as Buddhahood. And then, so in order to have that, one can't have a sort of partial attitude which just looks at some people or some beings and excludes others. Rather, one has to have one's vision encompass all of the beings that exist within the universe. Then, in addition to that, one has to have the wisdom which understands reality as it is, a special gnosis or wisdom that knows reality. And this verse then expresses two styles or ways of entering into and approaching and practicing the Mahayana path. The development of bodhicitta is the door to the Mahayana path. Without that, one's not a follower of the Mahayana. But it alone is not sufficient. It has to be augmented with this special kind of wisdom that knows reality. And so there are two types of practitioners here: those who first develop bodhicitta, and based upon that, and then having that established within themselves, develop the special gnosis that understands reality. Or the sharper kinds of disciples actually develop the wisdom first. They develop the understanding of reality first, and then subsequently develop bodhicitta.
Oh yeah, that is the cause. So that to be easy that you learn that you see la so on as you can. That easy. Sometimes you don't get now la. Maybe easy get la. And the cause shen don't get now la. Maybe easy get la. Nela. Run you cover don't get not to some ne. And you call that you mean you might get la. And the shen don't get now la. Maybe easy just maybe just a maybe. Rangitendo dinres milam to ya mamina. Shenjitendo kala je cheni. And you change la soba na shen che. What then I say, and Jango Lamatonga, and you like around Dunga Nazus and Pabuyoku Mebe, Pabuyoku Mebala, Semjan Shan Dunga Jinavala, Mississippi, Inchesa Mebe, Chanita, Swana, Chani, or that Shan Dunga Jinawala, Mississippi, Inchia, Kivala, quarter the Dunga Jiran to 10 ton, and you calling a white living a junior Jacob.
The Jerome Chigis
around Dungaji Nazu Sambe Pabuyoku Mebas 바보. 이게 바보요 와세요. 바보요 좀 매발라 샘jen시 동아진 나와라 미시비 이제 계사 매배.
So then, in order to develop compassion for all sentient beings, compassion here refers to the desire to free all other sentient beings from their suffering, the wish to oneself actually take the responsibility to free them from their suffering. In order to accomplish that, it's essential, necessary that one first has developed renunciation with respect to oneself. Because here compassion is based upon recognition of the torments that other sentient beings are undergoing, contemplating all of the different kinds of torments and hardship, that the different types of suffering that they're tormented by. And if you haven't first recognized one's own situation, one's own condition of being subject to all of the different kinds of suffering of samsara, then it's absolutely impossible to develop compassion if you don't have a recognition of your own suffering and the wish for yourself to be free from that suffering. Then it's absolutely impossible to fully recognize the sufferings of others and to develop the great compassion for others. There's a verse in the abbreviated stages of the path by Tsongkhapa that says that you have to have this kind of renunciation, a sort of a revulsion towards one's own samsaric condition, such that your hair stands on end. And you have to have that so that even while you're sleeping, you have a kind of deep revulsion towards your own and renunciate or revulsion of the suffering that oneself is undergoing. Without that, there's no way to apply that recognition of suffering to others and then to develop compassion towards them.
Oh yeah, that's it. Quarter 동아지 라신도 테네. 아니 다 동아랑 내가 집에 무슨 개탕. 아니 간들에서나 치매 나셔 도바다. 치매 나셔 도바. 치매 나셔 도바라야 아니 체대 나셔 도고와. 인자 남저 가서 단전이가 텔라 놓으면 일하 건배 체대 나셔 도. 아니 렌데밀로 코베 동아나 양양산배 치매 나셔 도. 전에 송안 나시 전에 아니 단조 예가와 단조 가소리 예가와다天체와 삼미간라 아니 오 가소리天체와 삼미간라天체와 가라天가리를 살아서 만달라 시망원도 삼미 공부 되니 그거 인자 안지 동아라 지신 짜네 텔레 미디어 바 텔레 기빈이 불아마 군조소나 예바 이치비 간에 아니 군조소나 째서 좋아다 아니 최대한 요도 메른 비치와 삼발라 때네 아니 치망 온디 삼미 공부 되니지 아니 로지 개바 인장 아니 최대 나시안 도 아니 치망 온도 삼미 공부 되니 개바지 공부 담바 텔라 앞에 yeah.
So renunciation here really refers to a kind of revulsion towards samsara, to the entirety of samsara. It's not just a sort of distaste for suffering or hardships that one is undergoing throughout in the course of one's life. Rather, it refers to a kind of general disgust towards the basic samsaric condition that we're undergoing and that we have undergone in the past and will undergo in the future. And so in order to develop this kind of renunciation or develop this revulsion, one has to, first of all, at the sort of basic stage of development of it, is getting rid of, or a prerequisite for this, is a sort of removal of one's focus and interest in what's going to happen in the future life as well. And then prerequisite for that is a kind of a loss of interest or excessive concern for what is happening in the present life. The way this operates is that concern for this life, one can, excessive concern for the events of this life can be removed by understanding the fact that one is going to die and that one is subject to impermanence. And then the removal of excessive concern for an excessive interest in what's going to happen in the next life and subsequent lives is eliminated by understanding the general properties of suffering that one has to undergo no matter what kind of lifetime, what kind of life one obtains in the subsequent life.
Oh yeah, that is ane tere ane kasare ngasong kutunga la jisi jane. ane kunjosa la jasu tuwe jamjo tang. ane miko jibongo tsujum ane susun tu sumba la tene. ane ngondo sami tensanji tokire de chima. chima ngondo sami tensanji towa deji inayang. dendri tensan towa yinzang. Da dunga ji rangshin le ma deba. 사제 년에 풍부디 년 신제라 안에 동아지 라신라 메데바 다 남rin그나 소만나신 체니 안 동아 출당 동아 계당 안에 동아 숨나 소와게 다 간제 동아지 라신라 마데바 인장 아니 거기 동아 차와도제 풍부디 동아 차와도제 동아 내와 시위 니시시 마도나 동아네 라신라 마데바 아니 가소래 수다 소매게 살 때와 되지 이나야 동아지 동안 원주와야 말에 때데 아니 가서래 도시 그 동안에 맞대봐 나와라 정도 미래 두실면 돼봐 다 대나신 전에 아니 된도 사람 치보와라 사면라 탑지 미래 제가나 지라 소와게 동아 양랑을 다 소소하래 명예단에 매바 인장 다 풍부들의 체제라 동아지랑 신에 맞대봐대 아니 방을 봐봐 누르게 코와 텐드라 라베 함미당 냐와이다 텐드 라마이 제와 상보 말에 제와니 네바트메 네줄라젠즈 산이 소환나신 로와 코와 생각 사자년이 풍부 코와 풍부들이 닐린 신제라 아니 동아지랑 신을 맞대봐래 코와 텐드라 레바 냐와 이다 텐드 라마이 간지지리 좋아리도 간지질라나양 아니 가소래 동아지랑신라 마자와 예장 풍부디 아니 동아 탐제 용사기 시험 내바 용사기 시 내바 투베 내주라 내주 인바데 천국래 전에 아니 자고되지 장보다 담반나신 전에 코와다다 동아지랑신도 통하지 고고하래
So at the very minimum then, sort of the entrance into the Buddhist path starts off by having sort of lessening one's attachment and interest and concern for the events of this life. Because by recognizing that oneself is impermanent and is inevitably going to die, we come to see that the events of this life are of lesser interest than lesser concern than what's going to happen next. After we die, we're going to have to be reborn in some sort of situation. So in order to ensure that that's going to be a good condition, we have to engage in proper ethical behavior, perform acts of charity and so forth, so that we'll generate merit such that we can be reborn into a good state of existence in the next life. But that alone is inadequate and isn't sufficient for developing the general revulsion or renunciation of samsara. For that, one has to come to recognize the general condition of samsara, the cycle of existence, such that no matter where one is born, even if one is born as sort of a god that is ruling the universe and that is experiencing pleasure all day long without any interruption, and has no sorts of ordinary kinds of suffering that humans have to undergo, but experiencing nothing but pleasure for eons at a time. Even gods such as that, eventually they die, and they're inevitably, sooner or later, going to fall into some lower evil form of existence in which they'll have to experience suffering, such as being born as an animal or as a hell denizen or a hungry ghost or whatever, or even a human for that matter. All of these, even these most powerful and worldly gods are subject to the process of death and rebirth, and thus they have to experience the general sufferings of samsara. So when we recognize this sort of general condition, we have to understand this properly. It's just as the Master Nagarjuna said in one of his works, that as long as one has taken up the contaminated, as long as one has appropriated or taken up the contaminated aggregates, the contaminated the aggregates or components of the person that are taken up together with contamination, then inevitably one is born into some kind of undesirable state of existence, even if it's being born as a god or one of the higher realms of meditative absorption. Eventually those states as well deteriorate, disintegrate, and one inevitably has to fall into a lower state of existence. So the basic sort of foundation of samsara is this process of appropriating, taking up the contaminated aggregates that make up a person. And this process is what ties us into continued rebirth into samsara as a whole.
Oh yeah, tende inzang da kuwa tata dunga je rangshin to kane. Jeo tende shuwa nangshin chene jene kang riju kang to je dunga je rangshin la ma dong wa de dunga je rangshin la ma da wa de tong ne. Lende mi lo kuwa dunga na yang yang san ne chimen nangshin to se de da du sung guai re. Lende san ba de jiu chung la ya jia ya ji dang. 来的连在下我的就整了这几个你要的，那这个告诉来的连在上我的就穷了呀家。我到南州那么说跟那个了，之前这样跟没了，但是连在上我的就整了马这个的，等于这连在没路，快点东啊呢，阳阳山的前面那些多，啊，他快点到东啊去让心到汤呢，俺那爱兄姐完了。 아니 동아라 메데비 로가가라 아니 동아 본데그 로제고래 대우 동아 메다나 아니 대우 동아기 주 아니 도바지 고그래 주 동아 아니 가려서 와서 다 가상 가서 가면 좋아 나신 전에 풍부디 줘야 돼 아니 다 가려서나 레라 되나 레양 니몽 그 사와야 아니 단세 말이 발라서 통네 라 레예장 니모메나 아니 레지나미 저거 지면해 봐. 시베스라 남가지 레션 판연이 많이인데 현지 제바 세지로 전에 남들 가서 나시 전에 뱀미도 일단 니몽그 자와 단세 말이 발 두고 하래. 단세 말이 발 두고 예자 다반 당신 본니스 미니 줄에 대비가라 아니 단세 본니스 통화 아니 당신라 아니 본인서 통화라 당진라 옷이 내지 그 님보 덤대 예방 해고 하래 당진라 옷이 덤변 옷이 본제 그 님보 덤대 예방 해와라 아니 다음에 또 비셔랑 해고 그래 다음에 또 비셔랑 해와라 아니 강외지기 아니 다음에 봐 아니 때라 빼고 하래 인자 아니 다음에 봐 때라 팝 다음에 또 비셔랍지 시라 될라 때네 당진 본인서 출대 삼바 아니 그 당전 도바예당 저거 동안 예와 시위에 이 시대 아니 덤니스 참아 주고 말이 인상 다자 가서래 다중간조 초대 두비 이제다 일마다 이실라 세가라 다 한번 nem보기 살로도나 간디스동 거와래 제나 녜라 아니 이제 참여마 주는 거 알아라 타바트니 그로 잡아 찾지 타바트니 그로 잡아라 타바생게리 아니 동안여와 시민이 시들이 동안여와 시발라 동안여와 신이다 미니 동안여와 시발라 동아그 주도고래 주도발라 아니 남녀 먹고 좀 되는 거고래 두세 체가라 아니 한번 nem보라 단대 뒤서가 나시 전에 돈이도 방원도 좋고 또 시작하래. 와. 그래서 먼저 이제 당에 야, 간서 단도가 고알려서 전에 타나. 어디를 대다 공배 코에 핀조라 이면까지 자 문제지 대화 인생군 단조니가 찰라 론바 이라 공배 체대 나셔도 체대 나셔도 하지 봐. 랜드 밀로 코베 동안나 양양 삼내 치면 나셔도 아 이렇게 와쳐발에 되는 저우동아 좀이게 와쳐발에 저우동아 랭에와 레페체와 레마셔와다 밑에봐 저와 취미사발라 소마 삼발라 때네 랜드 밀로가 삼발라 때네 코베 동안나 삼발라 때네 다 치망 치미 나셔가도 치망 온도 삼미 아니 사담이 된지 때 간대지 이나야 동아지라 실내 마대와래 삼바기 시민나셔도 안 디버주다야나
So then the way this basically operates for as far as the development of renunciation is renunciation or revulsion towards the cycle of existence, samsara, is concerned, is that at the base, the fundamental practice is for a person of lesser scope, that is a person who is primarily interested in what kind of rebirth they're going to have. Then they have to think about the fact of death and impermanence so as to ensure that they turn away from negative kinds of behavior in the present life and create positive actions and develop merit so that they'll achieve a good rebirth in the next life, rebirth as either a human or a god. But that alone is not sufficient for development of actual full renunciation of samsara. Rather, in order to achieve that, one has to recognize the general characteristics of samsaric suffering, that no matter, even if one's born in a high state of existence as a human or a god, that one's subject to different kinds of defects and suffering, and that eventually one dies and is reborn. In order to develop a sort of revulsion towards the general process of samsara, one has to contemplate the way karma and its results operate. Karma is action, and actions establish imprints on the mind which ripen into results, positive and negative results, in accordance with the positive and negative character of the action one's engaged in. So if one realizes that no matter what kind of action one engages in, it's going to entail rebirth into a state of existence which is sooner or later subject to the various forms of suffering. There are all different kinds of enumerations of suffering as it applies to samsara in general. You can talk about it in terms of 6 types of suffering, 8 or 3. These are explained in the stages of the path kind of texts. But by contemplating those, one understands that the entirety of samsara, the entire world of samsara is pervaded completely by this suffering nature. And seeing that karma inevitably gives rise to results, then one develops a renunciation towards samsara in general.
렌데미로 코비 동아 양양 권배 대다 권배 코에 핀조라 유명계직 자면 미지신 인생군도 타바 되니로 추나 대생에 주게발라 오다 대다 공부할 때에 코이 핀조 칸데지라나야 동아지라시란 마대봐 코이 핀조 칸데지 있나야 동아 치쳐봤담란 대화랑아 와 대화가 봐자 마도 라시지 대화자니 매봐 로베 가서 그래 시작을 나가서 패신바이 대화라 도발 주와데 세셔봐 대다 동아 패신라 도발 주와 메스 패신비 대화 칸데지 이나야 코 칸데레사나 아니 동아 치르쳐발라 대화랑 맞점 이제 마도 랑시지 대화지 매와이자 코 땡땡잖아 아니 대화데 둘네 아니 동아공 어주 그래스 동아데 가져 때나야 동아지 라시 매도 아니 대응 어주야 말이지 패신바이 대화라 도발 주와 대신도 대다 동아 패신라 도발 주와 메스 제장 코이 핀조 칸데지 이나야 아니 동아지 라시라 매 마대바 인장 이제 대다 코메 코에 핀줄라 동아지랑 심해 봐인장 유명까지 장야 미지신 코와다다 동아지랑 신도 때네 다 동아녀와 시위 니시 좀 마도 탐에도 지남이 아니 유명까지 장야 미시진 인제 동아녀와 시위 아니 타바 되니 그 노래 제마 많이 받지 제와 티세나 아니 내주 제바래 세야지라 대다 코메 코에 핀줄라 유명까지 장야 미지신 인생군도 타바 되니도 중나 대생에 좀 개발라 어쩌송하세요.
So developing renunciation of samsara or revulsion towards the cycle of existence or samsara, the criterion or a measure of having accomplished that is expressed also in the three principal aspects of the path by J. Rinpoche, where he says that when you think about, when you've thought about the nature of samsara again and again, the general nature of it, where it's pervaded by suffering, and through contemplating the general suffering characteristic of samsara, one it gets rid of any kind of interest or concern for what's going to happen in the next life as well. Not just concern for what's going to happen in the present life, but even absence of concern for experiencing happiness in the future life. Then one has actually achieved the true renunciation of samsara. What's being referred to here is that samsaric pleasure or happiness, any kind of thing that is considered to be good within a samsaric frame of reference, is actually not real good. It's not truly naturally good. Samsaric pleasures, samsaric goods are actually of the nature of suffering. If one investigates their fundamental nature in closer, one can find that they, by their very nature, they transform into their opposite, and the samsaric experience of pleasure, happiness, and so forth has sort of at its core a condition or nature such that it will inevitably transform into its opposite. Suffering. So this is demonstrated by the fact that with samsaric pleasure, if it was true, actual, real happiness, then no matter how much one engaged in it, as much as one seeks it and strives to experience it, one's happiness would just increase more and more and more without any kind of limit. But we can see in our own experience that that's not the way that samsaric, contaminated pleasure actually operates. It's rather that when one experiences it, eventually it turns into some kind of suffering experience.
Oh yeah, 이런 전에 대신 타바준 해준게 발라 타바준이 그래서 이자 탈바셔야 돼 가르래잖아 다 동아지 풍부 영화 시비 니시 차와도 저거 동아지 풍부 영화 시비 니시 세대 차와도 저거 동아지 풍부 세대 가르래서는 알아지 아니 풍부들의 사자일이 풍부 걸어왔으나야 아니 사자일이 풍부들 아니 시거리 풍부들 기염 풍부들라 가서 어디 인자 사자일이 풍부 차와도 저거 동안 영화 시비 니시 때라 탈바 시거리 그봐 네, 저가 저런저요 코완디 가위 차다 통해 로반네 라슨 파벤니지 제손데 타베 견전 좀 받친지 로스 라마 집에 가서도 와 저가 저런저요 코와세데 레년기 시왕도 집이 풍부되라 아니 쓰거와래 와 타바 동안 가서 코와세 오 텐저요 코비 차와도 그 동안 영화 시비 니시되라 타바 쓰거와래 와我차完对这个东岸年外西为你是他把这拖把切把了，东岸차完对这个东岸帮我，在这你的碰不的帮我的东岸的，这帮我切把了提出帮我，就靠我来从我的啥呢？但来的你莫你来从的，是吧？就来你了，来个早晚他就喜欢那些早晚你莫来越讲，天气些你莫买呢，来的那么个这个牌没多吧，是吧？CBC 了，那么个的来先喷你嘛，因为现在七八十几了，是，那准备准备的了，喷这个来的，或者这个喷这个来的，有啊来的，你现在期间你们再把印章带到给，那么一周喷涂过嘛的，是吧？喷没多把印章，他做，你们来涂吧，你们个啥玩意？他都呢，当时嘛就把它涂吧，是吧？
So what is then, once we've developed this revulsion towards the samsara by recognizing its character, understanding how it operates, seeing the defects, the undesirable defects of it, then when having that revulsion towards samsara, renunciation of samsara, is itself the impetus for the wish to achieve liberation. It's basically the substantial cause for the wish to achieve liberation. Liberation here is liberation from samsara. So in order to understand that properly, we have to understand what is samsara. Samsara actually refers to the aggregates of that make up a person, which are contaminated, that have as their sort of material cause contamination. That is a kind of contaminated aggregates, which also have as their nature being of the nature of pervasive suffering of being created. This form of suffering pervades the entirety of samsara, and specifically applies to the aggregates of the person, which are created through karma and the mental afflictions. And so these contaminated aggregates arise from these basic sources of karma and the mental afflictions. The karma itself is sort of the primary cause of the aggregates, because it's sort of like the karma is what in effect, or the result of karma is karma ripens into the contaminated aggregates, but it's actually the mental affliction, and specifically the mental affliction of ignorance, which is the cooperating condition that allows karma to manifest its result as the contaminated aggregates that are pervaded by suffering. So the way this operates is that karma operates as the basic sort of material cause, but it's not able to give forth its result unless it has a cooperative condition. And the way to illustrate this is that, for example, once one achieves the state of arhat, someone who has achieved nirvana, even these arhats still have the karma to be reborn within samsara, within their mental continuums, but because they don't have the cooperative condition of ignorance, the mental affliction, which is ignorance, that karmic propensity within their mind streams can't manifest its result and is unable to produce rebirth into the samsaric state.
Oh yeah, that tenda we tawa anita nyumong go tawa tanze mariba tom tuba yimba la tuba yinda ta tanzen de ani meba se boni sa mini tanze boni su boni wala khola ne ji yimbo top tanda ba chu ko e yimbo top de kare sa na ta khu shen yu ka ba ka sang ga chu ka me chu na shen ni da me to bi sheram o da me to bi sheram ke wa che ba la dang ji shen yu ri ba ka ko e o ani dan ji ge shen yu ri ba ka de da me to bi sheram ke da me to bi sheram ke ni ani sheram khon ne khon sheram ke ni thela tene da me la me bi ting e ji tene da me la me be lang dong ani chu ji ji la wa xi cha bi ko ne o de la ni o la sun pa ba ko no ji zhe su ni你台了电呢，当时帮你是前面出的什么？我的当时帮你前面出，老话说让就来军你是前面出的什么？是你俺那他把团一个来结果的，俺不能的了，俺不能不给他们家有前面买住吧？俺那他们家话的，俺不能不给，是吧？他们没家话，他们家有前面买住吧？俺那他们没家话的，俺不能不。那多了，他们家有前面嘛，主要他们家要话的。因此他挨了，弄把你带了包给的，俺不能包的。也是这么去，为了他这个呢，当我等你俺们去那些钱呢。哦，年纪轻不，他上那么大的结尾，记住连把空都去把那呢，身边他们家个都上街偷过我的多啦是，是吧？年纪轻不。아니 학산 남다 안에 저기 산제 그 창조 안에 창조 그심 어 대다 그 기술의 시와라 때네 다 치도 자와 섬정도 산제지 토마토 바 탐민도 냐바 그 톱거와도 또 그랬어
톱민도
마도 탐에도 톱거도 냐고 톱거와도 또 그랬어 하고서
디 담보디
담자와 하고서 담자와
except
아무 내용을 담자위 유대 체면 맞주 와라 담자 지금 말해 일단 타바 되니 그로 체님 맞게 와라 타바 톱뉴스 미니 톱뉴스 체면 주디 간라 다 신이 타바 되니 이렇게 거
So then once one recognizes how samsara arises, samsara, which is the contaminated aggregates, which are taken up due to contamination and pervaded with suffering, the suffering of being constructed by karma and mental afflictions, then that recognition of that induces one to wish to achieve liberation from samsara. That liberation, one has to determine whether or not it's possible to achieve that in order to determine whether that it is possible, that one has to understand how the karma itself arises from the mental afflictions, and that the principal or the primary mental affliction here is ignorance, which misconceives the self, which grasps the self as being real in a way in which it is not. So when one comes down, follows that line of reasoning such that one understands that the ignorance misconceiving the self is the fundamental source of samsara, then one thinks that one needs to obtain a powerful antidote which is able to eradicate completely that fundamental misconception of the self that is the root of samsara. And in order to develop that antidote, then is the wisdom which understands emptiness, as we mentioned yesterday. the wisdom that realizes emptiness, understands emptiness correctly, is the opposite. Basically, it's an understanding of the nature of things, which is the opposite or contrary of, opposite to the conceived object of ignorance. Ignorance, when it knows things, misperceives things, it takes as its principal object, as a base, and then it sort of imposes upon that a misconception. And the conceived object here is the fictitious object of that misconception. And so the wisdom realizing emptiness recognizes the non-existence of the conceived object of ignorance. So that kind of wisdom, in order to develop it, one has to follow the process that we laid out yesterday through study and so forth. And then for people who are of a higher sort of sharper bodhisattvas who wish to follow the path that are sharper, they develop wisdom first in order to understand that they won't just accept the path because someone teaches it to them. Rather, they have to investigate it and establish it validly through a valid sort of analysis and investigation that the path actually operates the way that it's presented. So they go through the process of establishing, understanding the emptiness, developing the wisdom that understands emptiness through reason, through reasoned investigation, and then recognizing that one can become free from samsara by cultivating that that wisdom. First, one understands it intellectually through rational investigation. Then one takes that understanding as the object of meditative concentration, so that you have that kind of shamatha, or stabilized type of meditative concentration on that object, emptiness. And then eventually develop the insight type of meditation that analyzes emptiness and investigates emptiness, such that one eventually develops the direct intuitive realization of emptiness. So the sharper sort of people following the bodhisattva path, Mahayana, will need to understand all of this correctly and establish it through valid knowledge before they actually commit themselves fully to developing the path. Once they've done that, then they develop great compassion. They develop, compassion as a source, compassion and love as the basis for the development of bodhicitta. And then in addition to that, they develop the higher aspiration, or resolve, I should say, the resolve to free all sentient beings from suffering. And then they take the responsibility upon themselves to achieve the perfect awakening of Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings.
Oh yeah, 인지 전부 삼자 동아지 나와라 미스바기 인지 대체, right? 동아의 찬의 지마를 차, 지마기 동아지 차와라 미스비 인지 전부의 제소. 아니 동아지는 섬전 대달라면 동아단 차와대 딱히 차오 양박이 학삼 아니 동아단 차와 차네 아니 라나면 봐 양다바 저비서 동아단 차와 차다라 그 차오 아니 달라 아니 동아단 차와를 차와 그 네와 매봐 대목에 아니 야란 다좀 공반 터나양 아니 섬전 동안 차고 아니 누가 매봐 누가 술라 요아레스나 아니 그새 연대 군단대배 나나면 양다바 저외 산제지 공방 마도라 마도지나 아니 섬자들 동안에 잡아 천민이 바인자 Ninji Chimbo, Lasam Namda Dang, Jevi, Sem Kanse, Lasam Namda Jevi, Jizu Lewa Kondu Chibala, Da Sanje Tamje to Sanje Tokawa de Donas, or Tam Sanje Koma Madonna, and the Samjet of the Dungajin, Dungala Chava Chinia, Meba Yizang, Tokawa de Dolas. Dana Top Gugina, Tom Nugre, Sigala, Tom Newade, Ani Kasore, Tobari Chebi, Ani Bajan Pachak, Zodi, Ani Yam Bijiba, the Shiji Jiba. Yinzang, Shiji Din and So, and dancing Mariba Yinzang, dancing Pachata, dancing Mariba Pachata, Java, Pony, Bonjik, never Yume. Bonjik Nimbo Yeme Dane, Nimbo Tony to be Sierra Yuba. They are any castle, some Tomba Nisi, Sierra Gacha, and Gabi, Tomba de Rashiji Majuba, Rebecca Gane, and Tony dancing ponies, Chame Truba Yinzang, Nimbo Kumbala, and dancing ponies, Tom Chame to December, and a dancing Pamba Yuba de any. Castle, Tomnis Cemetery in the Tony Quadan Java, Doba Lani, Simjan Tamjet into Sanje, Tom Nuba. Raw Tom Nugre, dancing bonus cemetery. And it, you the city Sabbat, city Jibatam Sebi, and you Bamba Tomnis Cemetery in the Simjan Tamji Sanje, Tom Nuba Doba in Chaneta, the other Buji, Jelutadil, the Sonari. So, turn tell a bane. Ambo Nembe, Tabatam Tenye, Lord Jevala, Tony Tobang to Chokure.
So the way that it works for the sharper type of person who's following the path is that they realize that in order to liberate all sentient beings, to become a Buddha, they first have to establish the entire process, the sequence of the steps of doing this, the way in which they are validly established. And so they recognize that first one has to, based upon recognition of one's own suffering and the general characteristics of one's own samsara, that applies to all other beings in the universe, and that they also are all undergoing the same kind of suffering that oneself is subject to. Then, based upon that, one develops great compassion, that is a wish to free them from all of their suffering. And the great compassion then serves as a basis for the development of the higher resolve, or the firm resolve, taking on the responsibility, saying that I myself will, by myself, will free all sentient beings from suffering. That in turn serves as a basis for the development of the bodhicitta, which is the wish or desire to achieve unexcelled perfect awakening for the sake of all sentient beings, because there one sees that if one reasons that I myself, as I currently am unable to even free myself from suffering, how could I possibly free all of the sentient beings? Who's able to do that, or what sort of person is able to free all sentient beings from suffering? Even the arhats who have achieved nirvana are not able to free all sentient beings from their suffering. Only a Buddha who has achieved unexcelled perfect awakening, which consists of the elimination of all faults and the development of all perfection of all good qualities. Only a Buddha, awakened being like that, is able to free all sentient beings from suffering. Therefore, in order to become, if I wish to become a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings, is it possible for me to do that? Simply hearing that it's possible is not adequate evidence to establish that validly. Rather, one has to investigate critically whether or not it is actually possible for a person to achieve Buddhahood. in order to, when in doing that, one sees that the source of samsara, as we mentioned earlier, is this basic ignorance, which is the misconception of the nature of the self. And that basic ignorance, then once you've identified that and established it rationally, then one has to ask, is it possible to remove that, to eliminate? Is there some sort of counteragent or antidote to that basic ignorance? And then one, in order to establish the existence of that sort of antidote, counteragent to ignorance, one has to develop the understanding of emptiness, as we mentioned yesterday, the emptiness which realizes the absence of a real self as it's conceived, as it's misconceived by ignorance. And so and then once one comes to establish through valid knowledge the existence of, that emptiness actually exists and that it serves as the antidote to ignorance, one comes to recognize that that sort of emptiness, that wisdom that understands emptiness or realizes emptiness, is the antidote to the two types of, it's an antidote not only to ignorance as it operates within us and operates, functions within us, but it's also an antidote to the impressions that the previous, that the operation of ignorance has embedded within our mind streams and the imprints within our minds. Understanding emptiness properly can serve as the powerful force that eradicates even those imprints. So since the mental afflictions themselves, and ignorance in particular as a mental affliction, as well as the imprints of the, or propensities and imprints of the mental action, the activity of the mental afflictions, are the two obstacles that prevent the achievement of perfect Buddhahood, one comes to establish validly that that understanding, development of the wisdom that understands emptiness is the antidote to the two sorts of obstructions or obstacles to the achievement of perfect Buddhahood. And when one sees that those two obstacles are removable through this antidote and establishes this all through valid reasoning, then the person who's following the path in the, they have sharper sort of sharper faculties. Then once they have recognized all of that, then they actually enter into the full practice of the path.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, that is the la. Ane lobe shiva tsoi, umajen kaso. Yanda xie zong an dante. Tendam number ngay june. Tang ngay timne jikden la, inji kundu jene so. O tegi thoma ambo anabagi yanda be xiewa asa sam. Ane tamu tongba ni. Dinzi boni se teme truma do tani. Dinzi boni se teme trumni. Ane bo dami to be xera ye bad. Ane toni to. Toni. Ane ta 양다 시종에 나데 전다 남방에 주네 세나 최담제 전다 바라 심매방에 주네 어땅에 팀네 세가라 라시 추와 준비 단나 단생 그 현유 가데 현유 아니 수인 주네 되네 심장 담제 동화라 찬뉴스 동화라 자와 춘이당 아니 톰 라나마 바양다와 소비 사제 콤바 톰뉴스 참여 주바 예상 대제라 아니 심장 통제 동아진의 심장 탐제라면에 동아단 차와데 가라 지그 다 집이 차오 양바기 다 년지 제데 두신 거래 당에 틈내 직대라 인식군도 제내송
So the master Shantarakshita has said this as well. There's a verse in which he says that first one, the person who's following the path in this sharper kind of fashion, they come to recognize that that ignorance has an antidote, which here is this special wisdom that understands that negates the object of the misconception of the self, the really existing or intrinsically existing self, which is fictitious. That sort of wisdom that understands emptiness is able to completely eradicate the conceived object of ignorance, and when that object has been negated, then ignorance itself disappears. So the sharper person, seeing that, then realizes that one is able to eliminate ignorance. And then, based upon that, they see how they themselves are suffering as a result of ignorance, and then further apply that to all of the other mother sentient beings in the universe who are suffering from ignorance as well. And then they take upon themselves, they develop the great compassion that I myself, great compassion here is I myself will free these sentient beings, wish to free all these sentient beings from suffering. They develop then the resolve to do that. They take the responsibility to do that, develop bodhicitta, the aspiration to achieve Buddhahood in order to accomplish that and proceed in that manner.
앙야 돈이 또 문으나 돈바니를 참아자베 나와 년만년나야 안에 저위 찬주가 섬제 너도 찬주 그 섬제 인지 전부지 다 조장 톱니스 참아 맞주나야 안에 톰되게 양다 대배 제장와 저위 찬주 섬제데 투비 두쇼랑샤데 드니 양다写作真喜欢这送安信息다 대배 제수 장화지이나 아니 매와 이식식도 아니 맛이 진짜 이제 마진이 라는 바양 답을 좀 찬주도 sem게 대제수 아니 사모 동반이 톰니스 체매 동반이 된라 패브니 아니 대제수 개바양 안도 지당을 들려와래.
So then, regarding the people of duller, of less sharp faculties, one would say you can say in general, as a general case, that generally they first develop following through faith and confidence in the validity of the Buddha, the teacher, that they understand bodhicitta. And they understand suffering with respect to themselves. They develop great compassion for all sentient beings in general. Based upon that, they develop the resolve and the aspiration to achieve Buddhahood. And then after that, then they fully investigate and establish their understanding of emptiness through reasoning and analytical investigation. So they proceed in that way in general.
Oh yeah, that tendavi ambo number that to kanjang ani anda be tawatan la peko wa yinjang ta tawatan la beba la ani kasore gacha 단체 다 갖고와래 가자 다 가와라 아니 나도 좀 받고 주제 단체 현유 수인 중국과 연장 나도 주비 주제 단체니 어디 뭐 손이是吧 다 가상 아주 아니 가서래 단체 참모 니모 시작바니 해야 되라 단체 해야 돼 가사 그 나도 좀 받아 제 나도 좀 받니 다 와라 말 통과래是吧 가사 그 나도 세가라 가사 라와와 rồi khasa rawa khana yang ma doi wa rawa je me ba yin za rang de chu ma rawa chu je me ba yin zang kha rawa du chu je ba khasa rawa du chu je ba de la khasa ka dan zeng si che ani phunso ani rawa du chu ba rawa du chu ba je ba de la ani du ge rawa me ba de ni da ni ye ba mi chen ni ani si je na la so wa na xin rawa du ma chu ba 看了嘛，对不？让往这没把印象， 풍소 라완도 주와 쳔바디 최시 단쟁이세 풍소 라완도 주와 쳔바디 최시 다도 쳔바다 최시 다도抓봐 간사 라완도 주와 쳔바디 간사 그 단쟁다 간사 그 다도抓봐 로도 세데 가르시고레 서가 간사 코랑기 내제 텔레 하바지 아니 쳔바 현상抓도시고레 존도세데 코랑기 내제 텔레 하바지 간사 라완도 주와 말때 라완도 마주바데라 라완도 주바 현상 아니 존도시고레 풍소 라완도 마주바 현상 아니 코랑기 내제 라완도 마주바 텔레 하바지 존도바 현상 취지 도도시 예제 라바 마심바 사반 조도와들라 존도 군데 비세야들라 메세 레바 마임바 텔라 사바가 하다라 와 베나 안에야 되시다.
So then getting back, whether you're following the Bodhisattva, the Mahayana path, as a person of sharper faculties or of duller faculties, regardless, as we can see, both of them have to understand, develop the wisdom that understands emptiness. So in order to do that, one has to, the wisdom that understands emptiness, as we mentioned earlier, is the direct antidote, the opposite, basically, counteragent that eliminates ignorance. And the way it does that is by recognizing that the conceived object of ignorance, the ignorance conceives a sort of status to its appearing object, which it doesn't actually possess. So it takes sort of a basic object and then superimposes onto that object a notion which which doesn't really exist or apply to the object that it's seeing, it's perceiving. So the way this works is that the ignorance adds to its appearing object a sort of status of real existence or autonomous existence or intrinsic existence that the object, the perceived object, doesn't actually have. Tamito Bisharab di Marbi Shinyu Gagba.
Oh, Maribi Shanyu. Shanyu Tametala Pago. Namani. Shanyu did nothing, Maribi Shanyu Datu Chuarwa, Shanyu Meba. Baguenda. Shanyu Marib Shanyu Dameba, Dameba Chatati, Ganda Della Datu Chuatzamaterva.
So basically the ignorance here is grasping its object as if it existed in a way that it in reality or truly does not exist. It sort of superimposes onto the object, the existing object, the appearing object, an existential status, a sort of mode of existence that the object thing doesn't really have. So that's called here technically the conceived object. Ignorance's conceived object is fictitious. It's conceiving a self or a sort of intrinsic existence or autonomous existence of the thing and superimposing that onto the thing. So here, another way of talking about this is that ignorance superimposes upon upon things a sort of existence that things don't actually possess. Here, again, this is different terms are used for this. Here, the most common one is self. self of persons or a self of phenomena. Self here is shorthand for a kind of autonomous existence, a form of existence which does not depend upon other things, or you could call this intrinsic existence as opposed to existence in which things depend upon other things. So ignorance effectively projects or superimposes upon things a status that they don't actually possess. And ignorance and wisdom realizing emptiness is the understanding that the conceived object of ignorance, that is autonomous existence or intrinsic existence or self, does not actually exist within things. So when we subdivide the two types of ignorance from the point of view of the basic objects that they're perceiving, we talk about the ignorance which misconceives a self of persons and the ignorance which misconceives a self of phenomena.
Oh yeah. Takasande Patsimbarwa, Tirson Tondo said, Te Trotolu Kanzere Sana, Tanda, Ani Kasore, Yesu Lebar Masumba, Saban Roto at the Carre Sana, Te Trotolu ni Chenamla, Rangung Sam, Rang Teniji Sam. Rangshinji Yubatimba, Rangshinji Truatimba, Kanayang, Ane Madewa Yubatimba, Sana Diguata Kaja, Pichakasha Tintayo, in the Rangung Oil some, Rangshinji some, Rangitani Yubatimba. Then the troops at Kazare Carre, Sana, Rangoya troops at the Kazashuimba, Tanya David, Dr. David, and Yabas. Ane 친하고쳐 강대 간대지 이나야 안에 강타냐 답이 시대 다시 시대 다시 뒤등도 안에 다시 tenir 자외 채나 안에 다시 뒤 자와는 얘기 매봐 얘기여나 안에 랑원에 주바 랑공어에 주바 랑게 채니 주바 라시 주바 임바라 얘기 매봐 인자 라시 주바 여바 짐바데 다 도도레 고랑게 마찬이지 마주바리 요아레디 랑네 요아 마레디 예제 사발 예제 레바라 마셈바 사반 로토바 인자 전도레스 로와 디데 랑 찬이지 메바레지 때네 메바 마레 랑 찬이지 메나 때네 메바 잔따나 아니 가츠 레바라 마셈바 인자 군데 조고아레 군데 가츠 레바라 마셈바 랑 찬이 주바 가고를 마도 예바 가고야 마라와 인자 랑 가츠 레바라 마셈바 인자 군데 조고아레
군데 랑기치니기
랑 찬이지 메바타나 와 랑 찬이지 메나야 메바 메메고 메바타나 군데 조고아레 전도 군데 전다도 섭제 되잖아.
So here in the text we've arrived at the point where it's there's a discussion of superimposition. This term could also you could in certain contexts could translate as exaggeration, but we're going to use superimposition here. So the superimposition upon things as if they have a self. This has two types where it's talking about superimposition of self of phenomena and a superimposition of things as having a self of persons, a person as having a self. Here, self is again shorthand for autonomous existence, intrinsic existence, and so forth. So based upon these two types of superimposition, there's the grasping at a self of phenomena and the grasping at a self of persons, misconception of the self of phenomena as having a self, or the misconception which grasps at persons as having a self. And both of these are ignorance, are what is called ignorance. So the way in which this ignorance operates to superimpose, create superimpositions, is that it holds or it grasps at phenomena as existing as if they were established by means of their own character, or by means of their own by means of intrinsic identity, or by means of intrinsic existence. So that's what is referred to here as superimposition. What superimposition refers to is not grasping, not apprehending correctly the existential status of a thing. When we take a thing, phenomenon as, and we understand it, if we go beyond the thing as it actually exists, we've exaggerated its existential status, or we've superimposed upon it an existential status that it doesn't actually possess. This is the process of superimposition also has a counterpart, which is underestimation, or not a sort of underestimation, one could say, where if one takes a thing and one denies that it exists as it actually does exist, and one it sort of rejects its existence as it does exist, then that's called underestimation or deprecation of the existential status of the phenomenon. So, 그래서 Dr. Tsongkhapa 많이나 Dr. So if we take any kind of thing, any object, and we search, investigate that thing, we seek within it for its designation. That is, we identify things, or we label things with conventions. We call them by names, and we identify them with conventions. So if one searches within the identified thing for its identity, that is the basis for ascribing identity to something, and if one is actually able to find that identity, or that designated object within the basis of its designation, then one would have to say that that thing exists from its own side, by means of its own intrinsic identity, or by means of its own, it exists by means of its own intrinsic existence. But because, and doing that, or rather the assumption that things exist in that way, having some kind of intrinsic identity or intrinsic existence, autonomous existence, is itself the that which is superimposition of ignorance.
Oh yeah, that na kasore da dang xian, I kan zhe yin na yang, ani rang wen ne sam rang ge chen yi sam rang xin ji zhu a, ma yi na ani yu zu kan zhe ji yo a re, san na ani to ba da cham cham xian yo a re, to ba mi ge da ba cham ji yo a re, xie de la. 天你要过去修完了，俺我他有些俺没多看起话的，自己看着把我遗忘完了说话，那些继续对我太大，那时候一个没多看起去，自己看着把我遗忘完，天那对了，确保感染没，我让心就准备确保感染没吧。 他到多边往给下巴赢，他到俺的命怎么多把怎么就往给下巴的，多边往给今天那么的大的是，我去那张积极对比去看这些也那样，俺的多边往给下巴嘛，多边大把怎么就买到，俺的往买的，说的多边往给今天那么大的些，去那多边往给下巴送把汤。 我觉得他们家你就对，去他们家多边往给下巴样，多边打什么的，
So thus, since it's the case that when you seek any kind of designated, when you seek for a designated object, you seek that designation within the basis of designation. Since it's the designation as such is not found within the designated object, therefore, it's the case that things are merely established as they're conceived or designated by thought and language. They only exist as through this process of conceptual and linguistic designation. They don't exist from their own side autonomously without this. They're merely established through thought and language, and merely exist as they're designated by thought. And this is explained in a sutra. The Buddha taught this in the sutra called the Question of Upali, where here he's referring to the entire universe, a universe comprised of the environment, the environmental world, as well as the inhabitants of the world, all of the sentient beings that dwell in it. And it says that these variegated, beautiful, blossoming flowers, and these gorgeous, blazing mansions of gold. Here, that's referring to, like in the realm of the gods, there are blazing mansions of gold. These don't have any kind of creator at all. They are established by the force of thought. The world is conceived by the force of thought. Then what the Buddha is teaching here is that all phenomena, whether you're speaking of external phenomena in the environment or the internal phenomena of sentient beings, persons, and so forth, all of those are established by the force of thought. And this is referring here to thought and language, designating, things are designated through thought and language.
Oh yeah. 多白下，咱这里边主就告诉，几天马日渐渐都康气作为上节说，提起呢几天的那么多一起去没得实现的生活是啊。我第一个开始生活的，现在几天马日渐渐都是那个了，但做起我的具体实践，是吧？具体实践的马日比渐渐都是马日比这步，是吧？马日比这步，马日比这步肯定是过的，现在具体实践。 주디 잠바 토마 안에 따라 베미다 보지나 아니 미제와 편지 내주 군론의 주의 말이 봐. 편지 군론의 주의 말이 벽군에 라는데 아니 미제와 편지를 내사. 그럼 다도시 그럼 안다데나 소하나 시체는 가서래 탐봉하시 달라 진주지. 다게 디생활라 차체바 소지천다 라와메바리 돌아니지 주간들라 디 탐봉하시 세가라 탐봉한 정지직다께 계제서 아니 마이와 준비직다께 디 마이와니 제다 체년라 때네 아니 가서라 다게 대화라 차바께와도 무슨 주고 하래 봐 다게 대화라 차바께 무슨야 유유유 주다
So this is the same basic ideas expressed by the Master Nagarjuna in his 60 verses of reasoning, where it says that the first line of this quotation says that the world has as its condition ignorance. So here, the word world can be understood as referring both to the external world of the environment, but here it's principally referring to the world of beings, the sentient beings, which are the inhabitants within the world, the environment of the world. So these beings the inhabitants of the world have as ignorance as their primary condition. What that means here is that it's expressed elsewhere in another text of Arya Nagarjuna as well, in which he says that at first one has the thought I, and then based on that thought I, first one thinks I, and then thinking I, having that thought, one thinks mine, and the thoughts I and mine then are when this is referring to the misconception, wrong view of the transitory collection, to use the technical term here, wrong view of the transitory collection, which is in reference to the I and the mine. Those two sorts of wrong views are here referred to as ignorance.
Oh yeah, dagi dewa la chaba je wangosum ji chudi gala, ane dagi dewa dala dewa yongade, ane khale dan yongore sana wangso tada wadang, ane shiroji segwe la matwe ba, ane dagi dewa menjum, dagi dewa drum menjum wanindang, wangso tada wadang, ane shiroji segwe la sebaki. Degi dejaji wangi ane gosumji le ngomba duche, ro gosumji. Ane debe ten drupdi zamba, ane dejaji, debe ten madrubada midebi ten drupdi zamba, xedangji. O chadang degi wangi ane le ngomba duche de, ro o le gewe le dang, migewe le, oda duche de. Oh, Lango de Canada, Lango Batuchi de Cala, Tendi and La Juni to Maripaki, Niva Duchi Glad to Truguari. Lady Paja Namshik into Ma, Gurma Takuti Zamba, Namshik Tendi, Kiduganamshi Tendi Truguari. Or Lady Paja Namshik into Ma, Truti Zamba, Duganamshi Tendi. Then Namshik thing the key, any. Ridu kandu jejayang, kandu jejuki, led shaba tegi, and if led in Drebu Mimba Cheba Tela, and you have
So the way this operates then is that we have this thought I, and if we're subject to this misconception or wrong view, which misconceives the nature of the I, this wrong view of the perishable transitory collection as being real, then that wrong view of the I, or the wrong view of the mine, based upon that, then one discriminates I and mine and others, self and others, so that one is attached. Because this forms a foundation for the arising of attachment to that which we interpret as being agreeable or desirable for the self, for the I, or for which we interpret as being mine. And we develop aversion and even animosity, anger, hatred, and so forth towards things which we interpret as being disagreeable or opposed to, not in the interest of that which is I or mine. So basically from this kind of process then is itself the action of ignorance, and when ignorance is operating within us in that way, then we engage in activity. Activity here is just another word for karma, and that kind of activity in turn imprints causal propensities within our stream of consciousness. And that's basically our consciousness in a causal state. Then subsequently, when other conditions are met, those imprints or propensities within our stream of consciousness ripen, manifest into further subsequent experiences of suffering.
Oh yeah, that lady Paja lady Shiba, Namshik to Yabate. 다 가서래 마음바게 미리겨 편지지나 미리겨 누바 쳐봐라 나 두제길래 데리야라 중에 나센지 주위 미시시비 주야 마제시바니 베귀니 편바 쳐베지 테마타니 레자니 전에 아니다 남들과 소와나시 전에 실렌스바 로와 오 실렌스바 실렌스바다 렘바니가 레데라 쇠다 로와 레데기 남인지 대우 아니 봐 미개와 누벌 제바 되기 뉴와야 소와 제바다라 아니 세바당 렘바니기 세바다 렘바세에 대 가르에서는 마음이 풍부라 민라와 감 듬비 당 다다지 풍부라 단지 세바라 쓰고 말해 소자 대도 탑되다 때 대도 탑아 대반에 세수 안 하지서 그러봐 마음 풍부라 다다지 풍부라 단지 세바다 마음 풍부라 듬비 세바 얘기 이 레데라 쇠다발라 되는 레준이바推荐도 송 세련된 레지 쇠다네 아니 레데기 니와推荐도 송데 니와야 미니 아니 계속 주발라 저와 처마 년점 저와라 온도 초비 내가 비지 아니 파자전지 남시 그 땡기스 아니 가소래 섬주선보지라 아니 스비단데 쓰고래 인상 텐데 스비단데 어디선보디 야 내가 마투 좋아 줍니 되네 기수된 년점 저와 당 아니 가로사나 제도가 남시면 미수지를 땐데 두고 가래 와 미수 내다 되네 제제 주르바 소와세가 안타다지 풍보디 줍니 다리 마영아도니 년담다니 바다지 풍보디 줍니 아니 가산시와나 제전에 시바다네 깨바다 양아들다 명하다 이미되다 주바다 대다께라도 중 사와시라 소와나 시체리 아니다 기위 동안에 손디 치위 동안에 벌써 동안에 고쳐가 또什么 두고 하래是吧 인상 지대 말이 견제도 간지 조비 산제송 제대 말이 발라 때에 양라 종이라 때에 안 지지지대 투투대 조비 산제 송바래
So the verse here of the 60 verses on reasoning, where it says that because the perfect Buddha, a perfect awakened one, has taught that the world has as its, here being the sentient beings within the world especially, has as its condition ignorance. This is referring then to the 12 links or factors of dependent origination. And we mentioned already briefly the first three of these, where you have ignorance here, the misconception of the I or the mind, and based upon that, engaging in activity, and that activity places imprints within the stream of consciousness. Those imprints within the stream of consciousness are carry over time, and they're even after the activity has ceased, the imprint of the activity continues to exist and carries over into time, and then over time, and then in the future, that imprint within the stream of consciousness will serve as a sort of primary condition for the arising of a subsequent lifetime. For that imprint to give forth its result, there has to be other conditions present, which are called craving, what are those three? Craving, grasping, craving, grasping. There's another one. Yeah, Sipa Limpa. Craving and grasping. Okay, yeah, sorry. Craving and grasping, yeah. So craving and grasping, which are sort of mental factors of sort of interest in, it can be such things as the desire to, an intention to give up one's the aggregates that make up one's previous life, and to take up the aggregates of a subsequent life. that craving and grasping, those mental factors, types of intention or desire, cause the imprint within the consciousness to give forth manifest its result. And that then is the arising of the existence, which is the first state of rebirth in the subsequent life. That in turn serves as a condition for the arising of what is called name and form, that referring basically to the mind and body complex of the reborn being. Those in turn serve as a condition for the arising of the sense faculties. Those set up the condition under which contact with objects can take place, and then the entire process of suffering arises out of that as well, through the sensation that arises from contact between senses and sense objects. Then suffering and other sorts of sensations arise. And the entire process of dependent origination is perpetuated, cycles that way, as it's explained, as it was explained last year in the basic verses on the middle way.
Oh yeah. 대체 가세 지대 말이 전제소 강지 조위 산제송 대치나 지대인데 남도 이시 지미세다 오 말이 비견전 토마 안에 가르라서나 저 가소리 코안 주지기 뒤소 로치지로데 말이 바이나 아니 말이 바게 아니 가서 로치지로이나 아랑원에 맞주바 좀 봐봐 랑원에 주바 좀 봐인다 로치지로 로치지로이나 다 랑원에 맞주바래 아니 처나 랑원에 맞주바이나 아니 랑원에 맞주바인자 다 처나 연이 랑원에 맞주 다 유주 가래에서나 안에 남도 그 샤점라 또배 샤점라 여바인장 대치나 지대인데 남도 시치 밑에 또배 샤바자인 바데 지 밑에 쓰는 말.
So the last two parts of this verse say, therefore this world, therefore since the Buddha taught that since the perfect Buddha taught that this world has ignorance as a condition, then therefore, why is it not agreeable, not acceptable to say that this world is thought? What that's referring to there is that ignorance clings to its objects as existing in a way in which they do not actually exist. Ignorance superimposes onto its objects, a form of existence that is autonomous existence, intrinsic existence, some sort of innate autonomous existence, which they don't actually possess. So ignorance is a misconception of things existing from their own side autonomously, when in fact things do not exist from their own side in this autonomous way that ignorance conceives of them. So that being the case, if we say that things don't exist intrinsically, autonomously from their own side, then how do they actually exist? How is it that we can say that things do exist? And then the answer that's given here is that they exist as they're established by thought.
Oh yeah. Oh, they what Takarana, Jason Butin, Jawar, 아니 지대는 지당 지대라 유지 지대다 유지 지대 니 예배나 다 니가 샤소거와 아니 지대는 랑을 맞추 랑은 거 맞추 바탕 아니 또배 따바 잠도 세진 또배 따바 잠도 세진 야대 줬다.
So then the explanation of this is the meaning of this statement which is in the 60 verses, is explained in its own commentary, the commentary by Chandrakirti, that that the worlds, when you say the word world, here it can refer to either the environmental world, the world, external world, or internal world of sentient beings. But you can equally apply it to both, and here it's applicable to both. That the worlds, multiple worlds, are not established by their own nature, by their own character. I'm sorry, let me re-say that. The worlds which are not established by their own character or own nature are explained as being merely designated by thought or merely conceived by thought.
다 뒤에라. 오야.你现在要告诉，多半没把对家了说了，原因原名呢，杨大团长多半是落单代表熟悉真，我的生活的。那第一个开始说的多半没把对家了是，去看到去那个去看到看这些那样，让着自己多半没把，俺你对家了所以俺你去那也把你骂的是。多半没把对家了，让着这个多半没把，对，说了原名那是，让着这个多半给俺那开始着这个多半也把人在着这个多半的下把印章下什么印章，俺那两大把天大把多半些，俺那老大大把熟悉真，他的这话我来用个多话，让着这个多半，
多这个多吧。
多半没把对家了说完了原名呐，去那个去看一那样，让着自己多半没把对家了说完也把你骂的。
So the next, there's another verse that expresses the same thought in the basic idea in the 400 verses of Aryadeva, and that says that since it's the case that desire and so forth have no existence without thought, who that's intelligent would hold So since it's the case that without thought, there's the desire and so forth, the other desire, etc., don't have any existence at all. Who that's intelligent would hold both real objects and thought? What this is referring to here is that things are established they exist not from their own side, but as they are established, posited by thought. It's only through the force of a thought which is positing their existence, establishing their existence, that things can be said to exist. So if that's the case, that things don't exist from their own side, but rather exist as they are established or posited by thought, then it's who that is has any intelligence would hold things both to be existing through thought and also existing as real objective objects here. So if there's some questions also you can ask. After this afternoon, okay. Yeah, this afternoon session, yeah. Sanje